All right, guys, let's go for Daniel chapter 2. Good morning. Daniel chapter 2 this morning. It's our destination. If you'll turn there, we're going to pick up in verse 19 where we left off last week. I'm so sorry. You guys are so adorable right now. My gosh, I love you. Oh, goodness. Hi. Sorry about that. Everyone watching the video is going to be like, what is he doing? It's a small room. Okay, so what is this thing that happens in me? I used to be, enamored with guitars and cars and all these things. Now I see little kids like, hi, oh my goodness, wow. I blame my wife. It's her fault. Anyway, Daniel chapter 2. And we're going to pick up in verse 19. As you're getting there in your Bible, as you're scrolling there or turning pages there, some 16 years, give or take, after the happenings of what we're going to read about today, about 16 years later down the road, we're going to read about the third siege of Jerusalem in Jeremiah chapters 32 and 33. And it's during the reign of Zedekiah, and Jeremiah is still prophesying there. He's still in Jerusalem. And the third siege is happening at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, who at that time will be in the 18th year of his reign. And you're like, wow, we're kind of jumping way ahead here. Yeah, and there's a reason why. Because in Jeremiah chapter 33, in verses 2 through 3, the Lord speaking through Jeremiah, so Jeremiah is speaking on behalf of the Lord, and he says this, in light of the coming destruction for the third besieging of Jerusalem. So remember, this is 16 years later. It says this in Jeremiah 33, 2 and 3. The Lord who made the earth, the Lord who forms it to establish it, the Lord is his name. Do you like the way God introduced himself? Hi, the Lord, everything you see, me. Everything you've seen and experienced, I made. Just puts everything in perspective, doesn't it? I'm the Lord, I made everything you've seen, you are here, I am higher, right? Puts everything under his sovereignty. He says this, call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and incomprehensible things you do not know. Call to me and I will give you understanding. It's interesting that the Hebrew word for incomprehensible is used to describe cities that are walled up or fortified. In other words, something that's inaccessible to you that you cannot surpass or get by is something that God has access to. There's no wall or fortification of wisdom, knowledge, or understanding that blocks God's sovereignty or power. And so Jeremiah, who prophesies 16 years later than we see God working in Daniel here in chapter 2, 16 years after that, we kind of get this perspective of how God is working in this exilic period. How God is revealing things in this exilic period. In a time of great darkness and separation, God is ministering and working through men in different places, in different locations. One's in Jerusalem, one's in Babylon. Ezekiel's kind of halfway, in this canal area where some of the exiles were located. God is working through people, and this is what we learn. This is the introductory point. Time and location changes nothing when it comes to the wisdom and power of God. Time and location changes nothing about God's ability, power, or sovereignty. Now, the way that he's working may change, but his power, his sovereignty, and who he is does not change based on time or location. And I think that's important for us to remember, because just as he was sovereign in Babylon, and just as he is sovereign in Jerusalem, he is sovereign now. He always has been, and he always will be. And we need to remember these things, because a lot of times we get bogged down by what's going on around us. We get beat down by the circumstances of the situations or even the people that are coming after us. And here's the point. God has not changed. God has not changed in the midst of all of this. He's the same as he's always been. And so here, as I looked at this text, we can think that the circumstances around us give us the ability, and we touched on this last week, give us the ability to have a different attitude. I justify my attitude based on what I've gone through, or I justify my attitude based on what's happening in our world right now. And that's not excusable according to Scripture. Because if Daniel can do what he's about to do, and that's worship the Lord and praise him in exile, in the situation, and with death, when death is on the line, like when the situation is dire, then we can do the same thing. So I hope this is an encouraging text for us to read together. Let's get into it. Here is as Daniel in Babylon is going to have the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember the king's request from last week. The king had said to his wise men, tell me what I dreamed and then interpret it. A little bit harder than, here's my dream, tell me what it means, right? Someone can just kind of, well, it means you really like cotton candy, you know, like because of based on these factors, whatever. And the king's like, no. I'll know that you can interpret the dream if you can tell me what the dream was. Show me that you're connected to a higher power. And so remember, Daniel had gone and talked to, or had Arioch, the commander of the guard, come and speak to him, and he had requested to go and speak to the king, and he asked time for the king to figure out what was going on, to pray. He and the boys pray. We pick up there in verse 19 of Daniel chapter 2, and we read this. The mystery, meaning the dream, was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night. And Daniel praised the God of heavens and declared, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my ancestors, because you have given me wisdom and power. And now you have let me know what we asked of you, for you have let us know the king's mystery. As I read this and intended to go much farther this morning, this whole declaration, you could say it's a prayer. It's really a declaration of praise in its essence. It stopped me in my tracks because I thought about our current situation. I thought about our world. Here in 2020, with all that's happened, all that's happening and all that we fear to happen, with uncertainty forecasted ahead of us, we're reminded of what is absolutely certain, and that's the wisdom and the power of God. The wisdom and the power of God is still present, is still working. And this is how Jesus wants to use his church, his body, to be salt and light. And nothing allows us to reveal that flavor of saltiness and to show and shine so bright as a world that is bland and dark. Amen? You need a world that's starting to wane in light and get darkened. You need a world that's losing its flavor, or a church situation that's starting to lose its flavor, blending into the culture. You need these opportunities to be drastic difference in the midst of a culture that's losing its purpose and its morality. Interestingly enough, just like Babylon. If you look at Babylon amongst ancient cultures, they were pretty twisted, pretty sick. You know, lots of them were. Assyria, the Roman Empire, lots of these ancient civilizations that you look at were very twisted and very gross as people. And nothing provided a sharper contrast than when you bring the men and women of God into the midst of that and let them shine. Let them bring truth and hope in these types of situations. Are you struggling with your faith in this season like I am? Are you struggling in faith? Just feel like, man, I'm really like kind of reaching the end of my rope here. You know, we've had that at certain points this year. My wife and I have talked about it. You know, just one more thing. Or like, delete Facebook, and your life will be happier. Like, there are so many things screaming to us that life is better for other people, or these situations are never going to end, or you know, this and that is going to continue forever, and our world is so broken. We need perspective on what's really going on, but we also need to remember that we can't be duped by the world system. We can't be drawn into thinking and believing what they believe. We have a greater hope. We have a higher power. I've experienced challenge to my walk this year, and I assume that many of us have. But I want you to take note of the text here. Daniel and the boys go to prayer in a life and death situation. What should we do? You can say it's a small room. We should pray. Yeah, exactly. Daniel goes to prayer. And then Daniel does what after God answers his prayer? Before he goes to the king. Goes back to prayer, goes back to praise, goes back to worship. He just gets everything right. It's all about what God is doing. His focus is on the Lord. His eyes are on the Lord. And here is the secret of Daniel's great faith and power. He had his eyes on God. That's the secret. You go, what is it about Daniel that just, oh man, he's just such a great character to read about. He's so, you know, he's all these things that I want to be. Well, why aren't you those things? The secret to Daniel's great faith and power is that he had his eyes on God. If we put our eyes on the Lord, he's going to use us in powerful ways as well. Not the same, but in ways here for our culture and our time. And there's some amazing parallels to this passage, and we're going to walk through these together because they're awesome, from Job chapter 12. And we all know Job's story, right? Job was a guy who was praised by God and attacked by the enemy. right? The enemy's like, you take this away from him, he'll curse you to your face. God lets him do it, and Job praises the Lord. So phase 2, Satan's like, you take this away, and you know, he'll curse you to your face. And God says, okay, but don't kill him. And so he attacks his body. You guys know the story, generally speaking. And finally, his wife comes up to him and says, curse God and die. You know, it's funny. One comedian was like, you ever notice this, that like Satan took all these things away from Job, but he didn't take his wife away? That's a brilliant observation, really. But when you think about this, it's like, and you find out why. She's like, just curse God and die anyway. I want the insurance money or something. Like, get out of here, dude. You guys, for context, remember that Job in chapter 12, as we're going to run these parallels, is responding to miserable friends, right? He says that to them. You never want a group of friends that comes around and is like, you did something wrong, dude. You're messed up. You're twisted. Now, they did really good for a while, because it says for a season, his friends just sat there with him. And they didn't say anything for a number of days. And then when they start talking, they're like, you know, you had to have done something wrong, Job. And they just start picking at him. He's like, miserable comforters are you, you know. Like, you guys are terrible. Why are you here? You know, just here condemning me for being in peril or in distress or whatever. And so they've been telling Job, you need to look for real wisdom. And at the beginning of chapter 12, Job looks at him and says, surely wisdom and knowledge will die with you. You know, I love language like that. I love like reading that, because I can see him saying it like, oh yeah, you guys know everything, don't you? You guys got it all figured out. Well, Daniel and Job are two guys who are in very extreme circumstances, very dire situations. And I want us to observe in conjunction how these men recognize and point to the sovereignty of God. If the secret to Daniel's faith is that his eyes are on God, and if the power for Job to be restored from his misery belonged to God, what did they do when their situations of their life were horrid, were terrible? I mean, situations we would look at and say, God hates me. Daniel chapter 20, he declares, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. Remember, he has a death sentence right now, and he's bought time, and God has revealed this to him. Now, I want you to notice this. This is an interesting note. We know where this story's going, right? If you've cheated like I have and you've read ahead, you know that Daniel's going to interpret this dream. He's not only going to tell Nebuchadnezzar what it is, he's going to interpret it and reveal that this is a prophetical message that God has given to Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So we know that part, but here, Daniel trusts in what the Lord has revealed to him so much, he is already praising God for what he's done. He already believes it. Has he talked to Nebuchadnezzar yet? No. He already believes it. He already knows that this is God and that God's doing it. And so he's recognizing that. Wisdom, he says, all of these things, wisdom and power belong to God. That's why he deserves to be praised. Job chapter 12, verse 13, wisdom and strength belong to God. Counsel and understanding are his. Job adds in verse 16, true wisdom and power belong to him. The deceived and the deceiver are his. Everything belongs to God. It's just like we read back in Jeremiah. God says, the Lord, you know me, the Lord, everything you see, mine. Everything that you see. Now notice this. In the midst of trouble and distress, these men take time to worship God, to recognize God. Focusing on Daniel, he worships before he goes to the king. And I think that we need to learn from this, you guys, because we need to prioritize not only our relational prayer with the Lord, but do we prioritize our worship to God before we do other things? Do you know how many times I've talked to people and they've been like, well, I just don't have time to read my Bible. I just don't have time to pray. I just don't have time to go to church. I just don't have time for these things. And my challenge is generally the same. We make time for so many other things. Why are they more important than God? Why are those things more important than the Lord? They're not. They're not. And if we want to be, listen, God still loves you. It's not like, and God is going to smite thee. No, that's not it at all. I don't even like the King James. Here's the point of this. I mean, it's fine. I'm not judging. But here's the point of that. God loves you. And because he loves you, we are to reciprocate that love, recognizing that love for us, which makes us incredibly relational. Not only with him, but with each other. Longing to spend time with him, and it should take priority over other things. We have things to do. We have responsibilities, but our priority list, it gets shuffled, doesn't it? It gets mixed up. We experience this throughout our lives. And this is all that I'm doing right here. I'm not trying to, well, Mike just walked in and just took a big old dump on my life this morning. That's not what I'm here to do. Okay? I'm just being real with you. That's not what I'm here to do. Sorry, Cole's just smirking at me. What I am here to do is to help you recalibrate, because I need to hear this stuff from you too. I need to hear these things from you. Mike, you're too focused on this aspect of ministry. When was the last time you just spent some time with the Lord? I need to hear that from the body. I need those challenges. We need each other to remind us of these things. Worship includes reading the word, praising him through declaration and song, serving, corporate gathering with the body. All these things are to be done as priority, not just as an afterthought, if I have time, if I can get there. They're priority. Life hangs in the balance, and Daniel worships first. I have a feeling if I was in Daniel's shoes, I would have taken off as soon as that revelation come, go, Arioch, get me to the king. Why? We got to get this done. We're going to die, man. Daniel's like, I'm going to worship for a bit, you guys. Just, I'll get down there. You know, I don't know how, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah handled that. They're probably like, dude, any second now, like you should probably get, I don't know. I don't know how they reacted, but here's the thing. God revealed and they worshiped. Notice what he recognizes in verse 21, moving down through the text. He, God, changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He removes kings and establishes kings. He decides who's the president. Oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't apply anymore? Pause for effect. You guys, who decides who our president is, us or him? Biblically speaking. Well, we vote, so we decide. Really? Really? You supersede him. Should you vote? Yes. Who decides? God. God does. This is no different. We don't supersede his rule. You're like, why would God give us? You ever asked that question in the past when we've had, I'm not saying who, in the past when we've had presidents, why did God give us this person? I just don't understand. It's not my job to know why. It's my job to obey when I'm in exile. It's my job to obey when I'm at home. It's my job to obey him in whatever situation I'm in. Now, do I do the right thing when given that opportunity? Yeah, Daniel did. When he had a say, he had his say. When he had his ability to have an effect, he has effect. Oh, I am just romping on everyone's toes right now, aren't I? And that's not my goal. Like, I'm not trying to upset people. I'm not trying to, like, work you guys up about anything. I'm just reminding you who's in charge. I want to remind us all of who's sovereign and who's in power here. God is the one who's in power. By the way, God's the one who put Nebuchadnezzar in charge, and not only that, brought him to Jerusalem to lay waste to it. He said that, Nebuchadnezzar, my instrument of destruction, in Ezekiel. He goes, I called him forward. And by the way, when Daniel goes later on this chapter, and he comes up to Nebuchadnezzar, and he goes, you are the King of Kings. Some people go, oh, Daniel, my goodness. You know, haven't you heard the song, King of Kings and Lord of Lords? That's not Nebuchadnezzar. The song's not about Nebuchadnezzar. But here's the point of that. God called him the King of Kings first in Ezekiel. Daniel's actually speaking to the same effect as the Lord himself when he said, I have called Nebuchadnezzar the King of Kings. In other words, the superpower of that day to come and lay waste to my city. Why? Because God was bringing judgment upon sin. God was bringing judgment for sin. And he is sovereign and right to do that. He is the one who removes kings and establishes kings. Job agrees. In chapter 12, verse 23, another parallel. He makes nations great, then destroys them. He enlarges nations, then leads them away. God is the one who is in charge of these things. And how easy is it for us, you guys, to forget that? How often do we forget that? How often do we look and go, this thing is spinning out of control? If you've ever been out of control in any type of vehicle, you know what I'm talking about. This is out of control. It's bad. Something's bad. No, it's not out of control. People are sinning as they have in the past. God is still in control. None of this is getting by him. You're like, what if I die? Heaven. What if I suffer? Glory. What if things are good? Worship. There's answers for all of these things. Worship always, but you know what I'm talking about. Praise. Rejoice when there's time to rejoice. Weep when it's a time to weep. Mourn when you should mourn. We understand these things, and the beauty of it all is if you read the Sermon on the Mount, this isn't even in the notes this morning, this is free. If you read the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about who are blessed and all those people who are mourning, who are brokenhearted, who he blesses those. Those who are struggling, he blesses people in those situations. You see, the economy of the world says that those who are doing really well and are rich and are happy and healthy and whole, that they're the ones that are being blessed by God. You realize that God cares about the brokenhearted, the poor, the destitute, the weak. He is the one who changes seasons. He is the one that removes and establishes kings. And when we recognize that, we lean into him and rely on him to give us wisdom and knowledge on how to navigate those waters. God is not unaware of how to get you through this life in a way that glorifies him. The issue is that often we're trying to navigate on our own instead of leaning into him and relying on him to walk us through that, like we see Daniel do here. What leads us to lean into him based on that recognition of times, seasons, and kings, by the way? You're like, what is it in my life that's lacking then? Because I have a hard time, reaching out for God's strength. I have a hard time for that. I keep looking at the situations around me. Do you know what the actual problem is at the core? It's pride. Pride is at the core of that. Because there's a pride that lies within us in our flesh that longs to take over and to run the show, to usurp authority from God, to supersede his authority, and to do things on our own in a way that glorifies me. But humility gives us this strong and powerful focus and reliance on who God is and what he's doing. You see, those who are humble, that's why all throughout Scripture we're told to be humble before God. Because those who are humble will rely on him, and he knows these waters. He knows this pathway. He knows where this is leading and where it will end. When we look to God as the one who is wise and powerful and able to do all these things, we humble ourselves before him. There's no room left for pride when our eyes are on Jesus. Amen? There is no room for pride when we look at Jesus, the most humble person to ever walk this earth. God in human flesh, if he can be humble, why can't I? Solomon understood this well. He wrote in Proverbs 11:2, when arrogance comes, disgrace follows, but with humility comes wisdom. So many people want to be wise and knowledgeable. He says this is the key. Humility brings wisdom. Being humble. Worship the Lord first. Be humble in view of his power. And then look at verse 22. This leads us to trust. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. If he knows what's hidden in the darkness, where are you supposed to be proximity-wise to him and his light? Right next to him. Right? Because if he knows what's out there, and as much as we're like, I'm strong, I'm a man, I'm not afraid of anything, we're all afraid of something. And so if we recognize that there's something out there, it's just like a kid in the dark. You ever act like it was a life and death situation to get something out of the garage for your parents? I don't know if you guys experienced that as a kid. When I had to go into the garage, it was a life and death situation. It was dark in there and there was weirdness, right? There was too many stacks of things. I remember running out there, then come running back inside. That was just a thing for me. I'm sorry. You're like, wow, Mike, you're so weak. Yes, I am. Like, I was scared of that. But here's the point. If I recognize that there is great darkness out there and he is light, where do I want to be? Right by him. I remember I was talking to, not name dropping, I was talking to Chuck Smith about this when I was a younger guy. And I was talking about a theological issue. And it was one of those gray area things, like where do you stand on this? And I remember Chuck looked at me and said, never get far enough away from the Lord to find out regarding that situation. He's like, why would you even ask that question? Never get far enough away from the Lord to find out if you can get into trouble in that way. And I remember I just carried that with me. At first, I remember telling my classmates, I was like, he dodged my question. No, he didn't. He saw my heart. He saw the reason I was asking it. And me as a young guy, I'm going to stump Chuck with this one. Ha! Fool. Fool of a toque. So, what lay beyond human comprehension? Seriously, though, like, if there ever was a character that I associate with in that series, it's Pippin. Just dorking my way through life. So What lay beyond human comprehension is known and understood by God. And as light floods a darkened room via a lamp, even more so, God who is light has never been in the dark. Pun. He's never been in the dark about anything. I thought that was funnier. I actually wrote it down. I thought that was, okay, I'm not going to use that on second service. So our trust and hope is the one who is light. He is our trust and hope. When we see that God is light, it puts our trust in him. It keeps us close to him. It's reliance. 1 John 1:5 says this and goes on through verse 7. This is the message we have heard from him and declare to you. You guys know this. God is light, and there is absolutely no darkness in him. If we say we have fellowship with him, and yet we walk in darkness, we're lying and we don't practice the truth. If we walk in the light, as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. Guys, 1 John chapter 1 is an absolute doctrinal, theological throwdown. It's such an amazing chapter of Scripture. And inside, I'm not going to teach those verses. That's not what we're here to do this morning. But I want us to recognize that God being light and remaining in that light is proof of his salvation in us. It's not earning our salvation. We're saved by grace through faith. But we prove where we stand when the light shines through us, because that's where we are. That's where we live. That's where we walk. And Daniel exemplifies this for us. We worship him in times of stress and trouble. We are humble before him and accept his rulership, his sovereignty over all things. We trust in him because he is light and there is no darkness in him. And finally, in verse 23, we give thanks to him. Notice this. Thankfulness is always, we talked about this in Colossians a lot. Thankfulness is always coupled with a believer who is walking with the Lord. Thankfulness flows out of a born-again, empowered, filled with the Spirit believer. I offer thanks and praise to you, verse 23, God of my ancestors, because you have given me wisdom and power. He recognizes where the source is. Who is the source? He says, you have given these things to me. And now you've let me know what we asked of you, for you have let us know the King's mystery. You have been the one that revealed this to us. A lack of thankfulness, church, and a lack of praise is the result of misunderstanding the purpose and direction of God. I'll say that again. A lack of thankfulness and praise is the result of misunderstanding the purpose and direction of God. If you have a lack of praise, if you have a lack of thankfulness, that doesn't mean you aren't saved, Christian. It means that you are lacking an understanding of the purpose and direction of God. You're like, yeah, that's the whole point. I don't know what's happening. So humbly lean into him. Humbly lean into him and rely on him. That's what he's teaching you right now. He's building your faith. Do we like it? No. We want to see the road ahead. We want to see what's up and around the bend. I want to see what's a foot in front of me sometimes. And God says, no. You'll rely on your own strength to get there if I show you. I want you holding on to me the whole way. And we trust God to have a greater purpose than what we see. A.W. Tozer said, all God's acts are done in perfect wisdom, first for his own glory, then for the highest good of the greatest number for the longest time. All of God's acts are done in perfect wisdom, and it's for his glory first and foremost. What God is doing himself, he is doing to bring glory to his name. And then it's for the highest good of the greatest number for the longest time. I fully agree with that. As we look at Daniel's worship session here, I often find myself wanting for God to give me wisdom and knowledge. But it's interesting, in that longing for that desire of wisdom and knowledge, we have to be sure that pride is not the motivator. That desiring wisdom and knowledge is coming from humility and wanting to be like Jesus. As the church, we want to be wise and knowledgeable so that we can be closer to him and so that we can be more like him, not so that we can lord it over or use it against people. Wisdom and knowledge is to be gained because we love him. And what's interesting about this is I think that there's a longing for us, but oftentimes we ask the question, how can we experience wisdom and knowledge in the church? How can we experience wisdom and knowledge in our home, in our workplace? Like, how can I be wise and understanding to what's happening in these situations? How many of you have felt clueless recently? Clueless on how to reach somebody. Clueless on how to do something. You know, you're like, I got YouTube for that. It doesn't have all the answers, okay? It doesn't have all the answers. There are situations in life we just don't know how to handle. Colossians chapter 2. As Paul speaks of his struggle for the church in Colossae, and we studied through this, he's speaking to Colossae, Laodicea, any of the believers there, trying to encourage them. And he's talking about what he himself, Paul, would refer to as the riches of complete understanding and knowledge of God's mystery, that is Christ. And he says this in verse 3 of Colossians 2. In him, Jesus, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Hold up. This thirst for understanding, this thirst for wisdom, what are we looking for? What's the answer to the equation? Jesus is the answer. You know, it's funny, like all these years later after the movement when I was a young kid, you know, back in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s and all these Jesus movements and all these things, it's like, you know what? It turns out the answer is actually Jesus. After all this time, where we got caught up in all this academia, we got caught up in this culture that talked about knowledge and reading all these things and how scholarly are you and how theological are you. Let me tell you this, the answer to all the riches and the treasures of wisdom and knowledge is Jesus. Jesus is the answer. Do you want to be wise? Do you want to be knowledgeable? Know him. Know him. That's the answer. Do you know what's amazing about that? Think about how that puts us all on the same level. That puts us all right here, all together. Because when we humbly realize that that's what God's word says, no one's walking around like, I'm so much smarter than you. Oh my gosh, you should go and do these studies. And there's nothing wrong with studying. There's nothing wrong with doing those. We should be studying the word of God. Don't get me wrong. There's a place to study and be learned. But when we use that as an ability to be better than other people, rather than to lift them up and humbly reach them, we've missed the heart of Christ. We don't know him. We're knowing pride. And so he says, do you want to know where all the treasure? Notice this. Sometimes I become a stickler about these things. When Paul says this, is it still up there? Oh, good. In him are hidden how many of the treasures of wisdom and knowledge? If this iPad was above, case closed. All of them. Know Jesus. Be in an intimate relationship with him. Talk with him. Seek his face in the word. Knowing him is all the wisdom and the knowledge that we could ever long for. And just as Daniel and the boys had their eyes on God, just as they had their eyes on God and they were reliant on his revelation to save their skin, they were done without this. So too, we can worship the Lord because of what Jesus has given us. They had their eyes on God. We look to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Amen. Let's keep our eyes on him. We've seen the promises of God fulfilled in Christ. And so we worship humbly. We trust in him. We thank him always. We walk with him because he is the light. And there's one more factor to this. We walk with him because he is light. But there's a responsibility that Jesus gave the church at the end of Matthew. Do you guys remember it? Go into all the earth and make disciples, right? Spurgeon said it really well, and we'll close with this idea. The moment you find the light and realize that the world is in the dark, run away with your match and lend somebody else a light. The moment that you recognize that Christ has saved you, that Jesus has done a work in your life, and you are humbly walking with him, take that light, take that match, and run away and lend somebody else the light. Show them that Jesus is the answer. There's an evangelical explosion that comes out of the heart and the mind of a believer whose life has been completely born again. Remember, all that old has passed away and the new has come. This is what God has called us to. It's such a great example here in Old Testament scripture to see Daniel and these guys living this out in Old Testament times. It's yet again a reminder of how great a salvation we have in Christ Jesus. To think if they could see with complete clarity what we know of Jesus, what we've seen Jesus do. Even so, we still look through a mirror dimly, and then we'll see him face to face someday. That's our hope. Let's pray together, you guys. Lord, as we close out our time this morning together, and especially as we're about to sing an old hymn and focus, Jesus, on who you are and our reliance upon you, Lord, I just ask that as we take a moment to pray individually with our heads bowed, our eyes closed, not looking at other people, but introspectively, Lord, just focusing on what you're saying to our hearts, I ask that you would give us ears to hear what your Spirit would say to this church. Give us ears to hear you. Lord, I thank you for examples like Daniel, for examples like Job. I thank you for these men who were in situations that were dire, and yet they had perspective. God, they weren't perfect men. Jesus, you were perfect in human flesh. And so, Lord, we just recognize humbly we want you. We want to be who you want us to be. We want to be in this relationship with you, Lord, that is completely reliant on your glory, your grace, your wisdom, your knowledge. And so would you bless this church with a closer walk with you? Let's take a moment, you guys. Let's just keep our heads bowed. Take a moment to pray, and then we'll worship together.